खालसा वाहिगुरु जी
वाहेगुरु
की
जी की
फतेह
फतेह।
वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह जी. Welcome to another session of Khoj Gurbani. This is Ravinder Singh joining you from Columbus. Today we will be uh, today is the third presentation of on the subject of Hukam, and it is Eileen Alden from California who will be enlightening us on this topic. So without any further ado, Eileen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ji. Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh. I think enlightening might be overselling. My presentation is just about the problems that I have as I think about Hukam, and it's really just an exploration of, what my challenges are as I kind of go through my sort of external influences, what I've been taught in school, things like this, in conflict with trying to absorb Gurbani concepts of Hukam. And so I thought that I would share those as a way, and in fact, if you turn to slide 2, when I talked about the presentation, at first I wasn't even sure if it's worth talking about that type of thing. But then, before I even get into the problems themselves, is it even a good idea to explore, what's going on in my mind at all? But I thought that for a couple of reasons it might be. So really, it focuses on free will and fate or determinism. These are the conflicts that I have as I explore Hukam. And I thought that as a framework to kind of touch on the different challenges that I have, I would look to the Gurbani quotes, just a few examples, and then I would talk about the logical perspective that where my thoughts take me, and then I would talk about the emotional perspective of where my thoughts take me, and then some conclusions. So on slide 3, the first question I asked myself is, is this even worth sharing, or should I keep these ideas to myself? But I think that there's probably just some similarity when we all try to, take ourselves closer to the Guru, because we're looking for, obviously, kind of divine help and guidance. We're using Gurbani to be our guide, and then all of this has to be absorbed by our mind. And so this is the area where I can focus most to, my thoughts and so I think it's worth, focusing my attention there to see what kind of roadblocks maybe I can move aside, and that's probably a helpful process, because I can't control, getting divine intervention, and Gurbani is already provided for me. So this is the area of my my work. So the first challenge area in my thinking comes in the area of free will. I know we talk about this a lot, but I'll just share, my perspective in that framework. When I think about Hukam, I think about this picture on the right where, Hukam is everywhere in everything, and I am part of it. And so that seems pretty straightforward, except when you start to think about free will. And so as I move to slide 5, this is one example of some message from Gurbani that just talks about Hukam. As I mentioned, in Gurbani, we're taught that God is everywhere, inside and outside, and nothing is outside of Hukam. And then on slide 6, I'm also told that my own deeds are really important, and that I have a responsibility for my situation, and it's up to me. Often it's said in Gurbani, oh my mind, please, behave this way or that way. And so there's clearly, an ability to shape our actions and shape our thoughts. And so this is also part of Gurbani, and also related to Hukam. And in Gurbani, these don't seem to be in conflict, but in my mind, they're in conflict. And so this is where I start to get to the challenge. So the first challenge in the logical perspective is that sometimes I think that this doesn't make sense, right? There's these two ideas seem to conflict. The first idea is that I control my thoughts and deeds, right? And the second idea is that God controls everything. So the way it flows for me in logic and where I see the conflict is that my thoughts and deeds and myself are part of everything. So if God controls everything, then God must control my thoughts and deeds also. But if I control my thoughts and deeds, then God does not control everything. So it seems that there's a contradiction in terms of logic. And so it even as I move away from this idea, I often kind of come back and I have to think about, I have to reprocess this because it just is not something I've understood in other contexts in the world, like science or other things, right? So I move to number 8, slide 8. I find that I think that there really is a logical answer if I go a little bit deeper and I kind of get away from some of the language barriers. And okay, so when I set this up with the two concepts, I purposely use the word control in both of these ideas. Even though that word control is not necessarily in Gurbani, this is kind of how my mind processes the idea. I think about control. So that forces me then to kind of go back and say, well, I might need to question that leap that I make in my mind about control, because the type of control that I exercise doesn't necessarily have to be the type of control that God exercises. So in the second point, what I'm exploring is that I control my thoughts by making decisions and directing my mind, and that seems very clear in Gurbani. And I control my actions by using my mind to instruct my body. That also seems intuitively clear. But if I remember that God is not a person, and I don't personify God with the same characteristics and the same process that I have, then I can understand that maybe God does not control things in the same way. So that's when I have to look to Hukam as God's mechanism, the rules and order that controls everything. And so this helps me to understand that Hukam is the instrument of God's control. And that means that God is not making decisions for me or instructing my body like a puppet master. So and that's where I think the conflict would have come from. So that kind of, for me, it helps to resolve the contradiction. Now, sometimes that's not enough to kind of look at the logical exploration. And so, I think that there's an emotional content as well, particularly when I talk about the idea of control or process of life. So on slide 9, I talk about the way this makes me feel when I think about Hukam. What's the challenge? What's one of the challenges about the way Hukam makes me feel? And what I find is that sometimes I feel as though there's a frustration if I can't see the results of my actions, if I can't trace the line from action to result, from cause to effect. And some of the typical questions, I mean, these are age-old kind of, philosophical questions. Why do bad things happen to good people? If I work hard and I follow Gurbani, what if I still have struggles and I don't, feel the way I think I should feel? What if I'm full of doubts, even though I continue to try? And so if I can't sort of see my progress and track progress through cause and effect, kind of like a work and a reward, then what's the point? So this Hukam intervention that creates the outcome can be frustrating because it's not clear. And so what I tend to try to do then in that situation, or one of the paths I think that you can find to limit that or kind of lessen that feeling, is to think of it more in terms of where to focus. So if I worry less about the future effect and sort of put that aside and say, yes, I would like this result to happen from my work, but, right, where do I really have the most control? Where do I really have the most ability to change something? In fact, by Jagraj Singh in Basics of Sikhi had used a Stephen Covey example in one of his lectures, his kata about Hukam, is a sphere of influence and a sphere of control. Right? I'm sorry, sphere of concern. So there's a lot of things I'm concerned about in the world, but really there's only a few things I can control. So if I focus my attention on my mind and my actions, where my control lies, that can direct my emotion more towards that as an end in and of itself. So the benefit of that refocusing away from result to actions, but one of the benefits of that, I think, is also that it focuses on my personal connection to God within. And that really, I think, is the point. So rather than focus on a process and a step-by-step progression to achieve something, if I focus on kind of like an athlete, fine-tuning and working on my condition, then that's where I have the most effectiveness. So the idea is not to focus on a ladder and step-by-step, where am I going, but focus on where am I right now in the moment. So then the next area where I get challenged in my thinking is around fate and a kind of a determinism that Hukam kind of leads me to think about. So when I think about Hukam as, sort of the order of the world, I know that Gurbani kind of implies that Hukam is related to these outcomes of life. And if it's predetermined and God has kind of orchestrated this giant play, I'm just a player in it, then maybe my fate is predestined, right? So, the path that I take, the choices I make, maybe those choices are not really my own. And so I find that there's I get conflicting messaging as I hear it in Gurbani when I think about this. Because first of all, there's talk about my fate being written, okay, and Hukam being, from before time, right, timeless. The Gurbani tells us that even before there was a universe, there was Hukam, and Hukam was operative, and that there's nothing we can do to change what's written by the Creator. Okay, so I'm holding this concept in my mind and thinking, okay, there's this great orchestration that's already happened, it's already in place. And then on slide 13, I'm also thinking, at the same time as I hold that thought in my mind, that Hukam is very hard to understand. I can't trace that path. And yet I'm instructed to try to understand this giant concept. I'm asked to try to understand Hukam, to alleviate my suffering, and and that acceptance of Hukam connects me to the Creator. Okay, so I'm trying to hold two things in my mind at the same time, that there's a determined fate, very complex, I can't understand it, and yet I need to understand it somehow. So from a logical perspective, where I tend to come out of this is again, it kind of comes back to control, and it comes down to understanding. So from the logical perspective, if I do control my deeds, just as we were talking about with free will, but yet at the same time, my fate is written by God, then I have to ask myself, is it pointless to control my actions? Right? My life is predetermined by God, and therefore my actions have no effect. Or if I actually can control my actions and then control my fate, then maybe it's not true that my fate is predetermined by God. So this is where I find this kind of contradiction that I roll around in my mind often. And the way that I kind of resolve it logically, or one way, is to say, well, is when I think about this predetermined destiny and the writing, is that the only way that God can control my fate is to have every choice mapped out in advance? Is that the only, sort of, do I have to have the roadmap outlined in the beginning? Is that the only way, or is that just my own human thinking about how this would be controlled, right? And so then I go back to the concept of Hukam as the determining factor of the outcome of my actions. So if for every action I take, if Hukam determines the result, right, then by creating Hukam before the universe began, that is how God has determined my destiny. So not necessarily, I think, do I have to envision, every turn that I make driving down the road, every choice of what I have for dinner, everything has been preset, but rather what has been preset is the mechanism that determines each choice, the outcome of each choice. So even though I can control my actions, the part that's the illusion is that the actions determine my fate. It's Hukam that creates the outcomes, and that helps to resolve the contradiction. So it's kind of a similar concept, but just the idea that the futility versus of my actions versus what might be sort of an ordained plan. And this is what leads me then to sort of the emotional challenge. And in the emotional challenge, what I find is that, this is on page 16, sometimes it just makes me feel really confused, because if I'm operating with my actions, and then there's also the creator operating in a much more mysterious way, I struggle to understand, what am I supposed to understand about Hukam? And I ask, questions like, if my actions have a result that I don't like, should I try again? At what point do I accept the outcome as being Hukam? How do I know what God wants? How do I know that the right path is on the left and not the right? And how do I know when to circle back and try again? And then similarly, if I see another person, how do I make sense of what they're experiencing? Should I, leave a person who's suffering because, that must be their Hukam? That's, they've sort of got their own destiny and they're following that, and so I should just, stay out of it. So again, sort of having this idea of predetermination is confusing when I'm also challenged to take actions. I don't know if I'm making the right choices if I can't comprehend Hukam. And so when I go to on slide 17, I think that the answer I find from an emotional standpoint is the question of how much trust I'm placing in God within me, and how much I'm looking for, external indicators of what's right and what's wrong. This is kind of the problem that I have to reorient in myself, right? So, there's no app on my phone to test, is this the right path? I don't have a Google map for Hukam. There's no pointing at the right path to take, and I can't comprehend, the sequence of events that's going to happen. But what I can do from Gurbani perspective is I can work on myself to remove halme, and I can develop a closer connection to God within. And so by doing that, right, if again I turn inward and focus there, then I become centered on God, and I can remove the halme, which enables me then to make my choices based on God, because I'm in alignment with God. And then that means that even if I can't see the sign pointing the way or an indication of what's the right choice, I myself become the arrow. So I myself become the indicator. I'm self-indicating. I'm self-directing, right? And I know that if I'm full of connection to the Creator, then my path is one that is also in line. So I don't have to worry about external indicators. So the conclusions, I think, I found, other areas in Gurbani that kind of point back to the same concept about the connection to God, praise and appreciation, following Hukam, realizing that if I face the Guru as Gurmukh, then that's the path to accepting Hukam. That's the connection to truth. And so I think it's only when you separate those two concepts that the problem tends to arise from the emotional perspective, and also even from the logical perspective. That connecting those concepts back together is kind of the key for me. And that's it. That's all I have.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks. Very nice. Anji, Dilpreet ji.
Okay, I think it was a very thoughtful presentation, and I liked the analogy of first explaining the confusion and then finding the answers. And I liked the way you have explained that we should own our actions, so we should not put blame of our actions on somebody else, and we are not a puppet. And then on the fate, if you can elaborate a little bit more. So on the fate, if I understood you right, you're saying that our actions are the choices which we are making, and Hukam is the tool which evaluate our choices, and then it decides the fate based on the choices we make at that moment. Is that right? Or?
I think you're mute right now.
Sorry. I was thinking that it's better to understand Hukam as the tool that God uses to take me from A to B, right? As I make choices, the result of that choice is part of the Hukam's, like the response, right? Like if Hukam is more like a computer, you put the input in and the output comes out, right? Instead of thinking of it, as I often tend to do, like a map that's already been written, right? So that because that feels very constraining, and that's where I have conflict about, well, where does my choice come into play then? So if it's sort of like, oh, if Hukam has already decided that I'm going to turn left at the next corner, right? That creates a conflict with my idea of it's not my fate to turn left. I might turn right. But if I think of Hukam instead as like, well, if you turn left, something will happen. If you turn right, something will happen. And, those choices both at the same time have been, created by Hukam. Then I understand, okay, Hukam is not like a hard determination. It's not a hard fate.
Right. So our fate is getting built based on our choices we make, right? We can say it.
Right. Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ji. Ekunkar ji.
Eileen, Cora, I really enjoyed this presentation a lot.
Thank you.
I loved your honesty about, well, what is free will? What is fate? What is destiny? I just thought the questions you posed were wonderful, and I thought the way that Gurbani almost appears to contradict itself in places was really wonderful. Because I think that's what we all struggle with, is that we want to approach all this with a logical mind, and you can't ultimately, because Gurbani is pointing to something beyond the logical mind that we can't access through the logical mind. And,
right.
And that's why I think the command is to meditate, because the mind has to go beyond polarity to understand these things. My question for you is, what role do you think the mind has in this whole process?
Well, I think that the real role is to find this. It seems like it's, I don't know, from a very secular perspective, right? It seems highly unusual to think about, this creator's manifest inside of you, right? It's almost just, you can't see it, you can't feel it, you just, it's just, your normal senses cannot explain it, right? And so I think what it is challenging your mind to get out of that sensory space and get to this other space where you can incorporate that into your thinking, right? And make that connection, because even with all these sort of, potential conflicts of logic, or these emotions that they just seem to contrast so strongly versus the world that we live in a secular way, right? That it's actually, that is such the core answer. Like over and over again, you can see, well, imagine if, you could connect so strongly with God that you could make the right choice, right? It's kind of mind-blowing to think about that as a path, and without kind of making that jump in your mind to say, okay, I can do that. I can connect to the creator, and I'll work on that, and I'll be this better, soul. Then, I don't think anything else can make sense. So I think that's the role of that's what your choices and the mind's role is.
Okay, great. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Ribudamavir ji.
Hanji, Vijay, thank you. Vaji Khalsa, Vaji Fateh. First of all, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I really like the format of the questions and then the answering it. Second, I'm just trying to get back to the presentation here. For some reason, I can't switch back. All right, yeah, I can see it now. So I had so many questions, but unfortunately, they're all slipping from my mind. So first of all, Harinder or Eileen, can you please forward this presentation? Actually, it would be very useful that if the presentations are forwarded to the whole group, then we can actually flip through the presentations and think about it, and possibly ask the questions in the next session as well. That would be really helpful.
Sure.
So, but coming back to this, I think so it was slide number 14. If you could go there.
Okay.
13. Maybe I'm getting confused here. So the fate and Hukam, that's actually a very, very nice interpretation. But I'm still very confused, with respect to the determinism and non-determinism. So if it's a game, there are rules in a game, and you play the game, and yet in the game there is a winner and there is a loser, so to speak. If it was that kind of a game, say it's football or what's it called, baseball, right? So there are two teams and the teams are playing. So if Hukam is the rules are the rules of the game, right? Then still there are multiple outcomes possible. And if I'm focused on the outcome, like I have gone in to play and I have gone in to win the game, that means, right, beat the other team, then the questions don't get answered, right? Because based on the decisions I am making, my coach is taking, the manager is taking, my teammates are making, or whatever it is, the outcome of the game is determined, right? So there's no fate element to it, deterministic fate element to it. But then all those other questions pop up, right? Am I making the right decision? Was this the right play to make? Am I aligned with the objectives, so to speak, right? But all my questions are being asked with respect to winning the game, right? And in this game, winning the game is beating the other team and my team coming on the top, right? But what if the game was not actually to win the game? That is what we think. That's what our man thinks, that you are playing this game to win the game. But the aim of the game is maybe something else, right? Maybe just to participate in it and enjoy it, while surely trying to win, but that's not the objective. So so when that, if I make that mental leap, then the decision of the all the questions that you asked, that is this the right action, or this is the wrong action, then all those questions become the wrong questions to ask, right? So it seems to me, therefore, the hukam is not just the rules of the game, but hukam is also recognizing that what we think is the game we are playing is actually not the game at all, and therefore our actions of good and bad and right and wrong become meaningless, and that inward turning that you are saying is maybe to slowly recognize that fact. So this is my guess. So I just wanted to share my thoughts regarding that.
Yeah, I think that's really very much parallel to what I was thinking as well. And I was thinking about it as focusing less on that end result of the game and focusing on your conditioning, right? And I think either way you look at it, it has the same result, right? If you basically just focus on your condition, you can take anything that comes, right? Even, it's kind of like sometimes I think about the butterfly effect, that the world is so complex and so complicated, and there's so much chaos in it. Even though there's an order, there's a godly order, trying to understand the chess game, the pieces, what play to make, what does God want in this situation versus that situation, trying to figure it out from a gameplay, it doesn't work, right? The only answer is that introspection. So it's kind of like, I agree with you. Even if you wanted to play the game, it's futile. So the best thing is to accept that inner development is the only path.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. In the morning,
Aline, that was a really wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed. Excuse me. As you are addressing the questions that we all run into when we start thinking about things logically, the whole issue of determinism and fate and free will and all that. If you start applying logic, of course, we get tied up in knots because logic doesn't seem to apply at God's level. And I like your comment that about thinking of God like a person. We anthropomorphize the process and think of somebody up there, maybe up there in the sky with a deep voice who's making individual decisions and micromanaging everything. And as you said, it's God works through his overall system and mechanisms and laws. So in terms of addressing that, I think we end up just having to live with things that seem like contradictions, like things that just don't seems like there are different levels of reality that we have to deal with and just accept that that's the way it is. And we run into some of that, for example, in quantum mechanics, where everything can be both a particle and a wave, or Schrödinger's cat can be both alive and dead. And somehow that's, the reality involves things at different levels that we don't understand. But the key is to be in tune with the hukam, with the message, which is inside us, Nanak Likhya Naal, and which is also, of course, since we can't always comprehend it ourselves, depending on our spiritual level, we are getting the essence of hukam through Gurbani as to what, and so getting in tune with hukam is kind of getting in tune with Gurbani and following it and understanding, looking at things from the Guru's perspective. So that's kind of what I was getting out of your talk. But again, it was a really enjoyable presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ji.
Ravindraji. Ravindraji, you're mute right now.
Sorry about that. Eileen, thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. Enjoyed it thoroughly. No real questions because you've articulated them much better than I could have. Just some thoughts. I often think in terms of the fact that at the logical level, we are never going to resolve this issue. And so at the logical level, one has to really reconcile. But there is a deeper reconciliation that has to happen. And I think that is at the level of the deeper mind, which is why, when I did this presentation last week, I called it accessing the quantum mind, because, it seems to me that there is a quantum aspect to our mind where some of these conflicts and contradictions do resolve themselves. So to your point, I think no matter how we put it, it just boils down to really focusing on your action. And it seems to me that even though Hukam is ultimately beyond the intellect, it still is within the range of our experience. Otherwise, Guru Nanak would not recommend to us that we try and recognize it or understand it. So it seems to me that we really have to cultivate the inner faculties that we have. We spoke about them the last week: intuition and spontaneity and so on. But lovely. I think you've framed these questions very well, and I would really love to use some of this articulation in my own thought process. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome, Chi. It's it's a pleasure. It's easier in some ways to go last in the line, because I can I can benefit from everyone else's thoughts, but then it's also hard to come up with something that's a little bit new. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Anji, Chetan Ripwitji.
Thank you, Eileen. It was a beautiful presentation. You raised a lot of questions. I really like the part, like couple of things that you said that other panelists also echoed, like getting into that space or connection or focusing into the present moment. And especially when you said, like, I myself am the arrow, I think that nailed it. So I don't have any question, but I do have an observation. I think on slide number 4 that you showed, where you showed a Venn diagram of Hukam is all encompassing and me as part of that. So I was thinking, like, why this question of free will and fate always arises whenever there is a discussion about Hukam. And because, I think in the next slide you clarified Hukme kar karayda duja kis kahiye pai. And there is no other, right? So the way I would like to think about this is, like, these questions, like about free will or fate, they are actually born out of Home. When I consider myself separate from the whole, whenever I feel that I and you are separate, right? Jab tum hote tab hum nahi, jab tu main nahi. Like the Shabad, like whenever I think of myself as separate, these questions of free will and fate seem to arise. And if there is no me, then there is no free will. That's how I like to think about this. But thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Gino. I think that's. I think that's also really parallel to the idea of connecting. Getting rid of Home, getting that connection stronger, so that it can illuminate. How your actions come from the Creator instead of from Home. I think what I struggle with more is just a like super basic idea of, I think right now I'm going to pick up, a pen. Did I do that, or did the Creator do that? Like, just very, very simple. Like that's where I kind of often circle back to, just trying to understand how is that action possibly, part of Hukam. So
actually, Eileen, I would like to say something on that. Like, I have actually thought about this, like, and if you actually go deeply into this, the further question that the basic question you are asking is, from where do my thoughts arise? Because the actions are result of my thought. Like if you would like to pick up a pen, that basically first there is a thought and then there is an action. So the fundamental question then becomes, from where do the thoughts come, or from where do the thoughts arise? And as Ravinder Virji said last time in his presentation, there are 11 million bits per second information coming in, and we are only able to process or store 126 bits per second. So the way I understand is, I mean, even this picking up of a pen or taking a left or right, the process is so subconscious, and we have accumulated, and the Gurbani word for that is likha. We have accumulated it and written in our subconscious so much, even in this lifetime, that it all happens automatically and comes from the preferences we have made in the past. Like you said, a Gurbani Pankti, Purab likhya kyun meti hai, right? So how can I erase what I've written before? So, I mean, I feel all the thoughts arise from what I am doing right now, and the process is basically storing itself in my mind, and I'm writing that likha continuously. So that's how I view it.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you, Virji.
Thanks to you.
Thank you, Virji. Prapit Virji.
Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh. Eileen Ji, congratulations to you. Like all the panelists have already mentioned.
Thank you, Ji.
What I really liked is the positioning of your presentation from a self-analysis perspective, talking more about the questions and the confusions rather than my own conclusions. I have felt that whenever you're sharing something in public, you have a tendency to overlook or hide what you don't know and act like an expert. So at least for me, this is really encouraging and comforting to really come out with your doubts that helps you move forward in a much more honest manner. So thanks for that. I also had a few observations, no questions really. I think when we think about Hukam or even Naam or Guru and Shabad, which are the next logical topics, and I'd like to believe they are very, very closely connected. It's more at the metaphysical level, if you will. We just talked about how at times Gurbani seems to contradict and we cannot decipher it through logic. Maybe that situation is arising because my domain of logic is very narrow and I need to expand it to really be able to find logic there, or the sense of sahaj or intuition where logic just automatically comes. But that doesn't mean I don't have to ask questions, which is also what Gurbani is encouraging me to do. I think it's hard to articulate it, but it's more like whether I am controlling something or God is controlling something. Whenever I have looked at it in this way, I have struggled to move forward. Because Gurbani says, Hukam pachane ta eko jane, Nanak Satgur diya bujhaye jiyo. So when I am able to be in reconciliation of the Hukam, ta eko jane, then I recognize and become the one. So when actually there is only one, then for me to discuss it in a manner where there is a God and there is me is actually a starting point which is contradictory in itself, and I would never arrive at a logic. Because God is separate, I am separate. Some decisions He is making, some I am making, or all He is making, some I am making. If everything is one, then God's decision and my decision is also one. And you raised the contradiction that if everything is under Hukam and my thoughts can control my actions, then my actions are not in Hukam. There is a contradiction. I raise another contradiction that if everything is one and I am having certain thoughts and taking certain action, and I am part of the one or I am the one, then God is taking those decisions and actions. So to simplify it, I think it is my presumption or my experience in an illusion where I experience myself or I look at myself as different from the one, which is where my doubts start coming in. I am separating myself from the one, and which is where I'm living in duality. Gurbani says, "Dunya dekh mat pool, sahib lekha mangsi." So this dunya is having my feet in these two boats, though now. That duality, or like Kabir Sahib says, "E doye nena mat chuo, fir dekhan ki aas." I keep, on one side, I want to have that binocular vision. I don't want to touch it. I look at things with that duality, but still I want to see him. That's not possible. First of all, that submission, that acceptance has to come in, where I merge with the one. So I like to take the analogy. I think one of the Hollywood movies, Matrix, everyone would have seen. It's almost like what Morpheus tells Neo, that the choice is yours whether you want to take the red pill and stay in the illusionary world, or take the blue pill where you can explore how deep the rabbit hole really goes. So that making that choice of taking the blue pill is actually first of all coming in submission that I do not know anything. Please give me Gur Prasad. Let me get enlightened from the source, which is actually my real source. And we often quote Mantu Jot Sarup hai, Apna Mool Pachan. So, it's that's how I look at it. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Richie. Thank you for sharing that. I'll add one thing to that idea, because I think it's it does make a lot of sense. It's very intuitive, and I think one of the struggles in my own path is that if it was as easy to take a pill, then my problem would be solved, right? But through Gurbani, it's I'm over and over again, Guru Nanak asks to, please orient my mind, please, remember God always. We're imploring my mind to be calm and to get to this acceptance place. So the activity and the constant choice to do that, or the constant refocusing and that path, I think it has the most benefit to answer these questions, but it's also one of the most difficult things compared to the secular world. So that's what I would add. And I think that's why also sometimes some of the conflict comes up, is because it's not like if I do it once, I never have to do it again. I never have to think about it again. I have to constantly think about it. Thank you, Ji.
Right, Manji. I think that's. I would second your thoughts there. Gurbani also says in this process of trying to understand, Je ko Sikh Guru seti sanmukh hove ta sanmukh Guru seti jio rahe gur nale. So for me to orient myself towards the one, I have to be with the Guru, take the guidance of the Guru, and it's a constant process which we naturally have to do. Absolutely.
Thank you, Virji.
Thank you, Ji. And Ji, Iqbal Kaur Ji, any questions or observations?
No, thank you. And I'm Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm thankful to Prapri joining me, for letting me join this platform. This is form. And I agree with Prapreet, and I don't know the name of the lady who is.
Eileen. Thanks for joining, Ji. And Ekankar Ji, any final comments for today?
No final comments, just really enjoyed the conversation very much.
Thank you, Ji. Thanks for joining. And Ji, in the morning with you.
I don't have any other comments. I thought this was a great presentation.
Thank you. Chaitanya Ji.
Naveer, I don't have anything to add. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
Prapreet Ji.
Yeah, Virji, one quick comment. Like we were just discussing, and that's what I also personally experienced, going through the logic of understanding Gurbani and that constant struggle. I felt that if you look at the structure of Guru Granth Sahib, where logic and Sangeet or music encapsulating Gurbani in ragas, these are the two basic pillars, so to say, which how Gurbani is laid down. So I think while we go through the logic, it's also important for us to delve into those ragas and even try to sing the shabads, which is where my man or my thoughts take a leap into the other dimension, and it softens my mind to be really able to become like a sponge and absorb what is there. I'm talking from a personal experience. I know very little. Your perception and how you feel, how you experience your surroundings kind of changes. So if we could have something like that, where in the discussion, maybe even one slok or one line, somebody can sing, and trying to learn those ragas, that could be useful. And I can volunteer to do that singing if you decide to have something like that.
And thank you, Vijay. Thanks for your feedback, and I will discuss with you offline on the format and how we can do it. Thank you very much, Ji. And Eileen, thank you very much. A wonderful presentation. So, Vaheguru Ji.
Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh.